Eleanor wrapped her frail fingers around a warm cup of tea, feeling the heat seep into her skin. Outside, the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and pink. She sat by the window in her small wooden chair, gazing. At her backyard garden, the lavender plants swayed gently in the evening breeze. It was a quiet, familiar scene, one she had watched unfold every evening for years. Yet tonight, something felt different. At 72, Eleanor had grown accustomed to solitude. Her husband had passed away years ago, and her only daughter, Melissa, lived in another state with her own family. Melissa called often, checking in to make sure her mother was doing well. She always encouraged Eleanor to join senior groups, try new activities, or even move closer to her. But Eleanor loved her independence. She found comfort in her daily routines, reading books on Buddhist philosophy, taking slow walks around the neighborhood, and tending to her garden. Lately, however, something unusual had been happening. It started subtly, strange sensations she couldn't quite explain. Some nights, she would wake up suddenly at exactly 3 a.m., her heart beating faster than usual. There was no fear, no nightmares, just an overwhelming sense of awareness, as if something unseen had stirred her awake. Other times, she would be sitting in her chair, reading or meditating when a wave of warmth would rise through her body, spreading from her chest to her fingertips. It wasn't the heat of summer, nor a reaction to tea or blankets. It felt different, like an internal shift rather than an external cause. Then there were the changes in her senses. Sounds seemed louder, colors appeared richer, and scents were more intense than ever before. She found herself noticing the smallest details, the way the wind rustled the leaves, the subtle fragrance of lavender in the air, even the distant hum of traffic on the main road. It was as if her body had fine-tuned itself to pick up on things she had never paid attention to before. Concerned, Eleanor had visited her doctor for a checkup. They ran tests, checked her vitals, and after a thorough evaluation, the doctor smiled and said, "You're in great health for your age, Eleanor. Maybe it's just a little stress or changes in your routine." She wanted to believe that, but deep down, she knew this wasn't just aging or stress. Something inside her was shifting, recalibrating in a way she didn't understand. Was her body trying to tell her something? Was this just a passing phase, or was it part of something much bigger? Eleanor had spent her life believing in the power of stillness, the wisdom of patience. But for the first time in years, she felt a stirring, an invitation to explore something, beyond the physical world she had always known. What she didn't realize yet was that she was stepping into a journey of spiritual awakening, one that would change her forever. Eleanor had always been in tune with her body. She knew the slight aches in her joints when the weather changed, the way her breathing slowed during her evening meditation, the comforting warmth of the sun on her skin during her afternoon walks. But lately, something felt different. It wasn't just the occasional stiffness in her back or the fatigue that sometimes crept in after a long day in the garden. No, this was something entirely unfamiliar. It was as if her body had begun communicating with her in a new way, subtly, but persistently. The first thing she noticed was the sudden waves of heat. One evening as she sat reading in her armchair, a deep warmth started in her chest and spread outward, moving through her arms, down her legs, and into her fingertips. It wasn't unpleasant, but it was startling. She set her book down and placed a hand on her chest, trying to steady her breath. "Maybe it's just my circulation," she murmured to herself. But it kept happening. Some mornings she would wake up feeling a strange energy coursing through her body, like an internal current of warmth, leaving her both comforted and bewildered. Other times, she would feel a tingling sensation in her hands, as if tiny sparks of electricity were dancing across her skin. At first, she dismissed it. Perhaps it was just a part of aging, hormonal shifts, changes in blood pressure. But when it started happening during her meditation sessions, she knew it was something more. One morning, as she sat cross-legged on her cushion, focusing on her breath, the warmth returned, stronger this time. It started at the base of her spine and rose up, like a gentle flame flickering along her back. She inhaled deeply, trying not to panic. There was no pain, no discomfort, just an undeniable sense that something inside her was waking up. Eleanor had read about Kundalini energy before, a powerful force described in Buddhist and Hindu traditions. It was said to be a dormant energy that, when awakened, could lead to profound spiritual insight. She had always assumed it was something that happened to monks, yogis, or deeply devoted spiritual seekers, not to a 72-year-old woman sipping tea in her small suburban home. And yet, here it was. Then came the temperature shifts. One evening, as she sat on her porch watching the sunset, a chill ran down her spine. Not the kind that came from a cool breeze, but something deeper. It was as if an invisible wave of energy had passed through her, leaving a trail of goosebumps along her arms. She shivered, pulling her shawl tighter around her shoulders. Other times, she would feel an intense warmth in her hands, even when the room was cool. She would rub her palms together, trying to shake the sensation, but it lingered. It was as if her body was responding to something she couldn't see, something just beyond her normal perception. And then, the sounds changed. Eleanor had always enjoyed the soft ticking of her living room clock, the distant hum of traffic, the gentle chirping of birds outside her window. But suddenly, everything seemed louder. The ticking of the clock became almost unbearable, like a drum pounding in her ears. The sound of the wind rustling through the trees felt amplified, as if she were standing in the middle of a storm, rather than a quiet backyard. Even her own footsteps on the wooden floor seemed sharper, more pronounced. She found herself turning down the volume on her television, lowering her voice when she spoke on the phone. It was as if her senses had been turned up a notch, fine-tuned to a frequency she hadn't noticed before. It wasn't just sound. Colors seemed more vibrant, scents more potent. The lavender in her garden smelled stronger than ever. The sky at dusk seemed painted with deeper shades of pink and purple. She would run her fingers along the wooden table, noticing the grain of the wood with an intensity she had never felt before. One afternoon, while shopping for groceries, she passed by a woman wearing a strong perfume. The scent hit her so intensely that she had to step away, her head spinning. "What is happening to me?" she wondered, gripping the handle of her shopping cart. The strangest part was that it didn't feel like an illness. She wasn't in pain, and she didn't feel weak. If anything, she felt more awake, more alive. At night, when she lay in bed, these sensations would continue. Sometimes, she would close her eyes and feel an odd pressure between her eyebrows, right where her third eye was said to be located. It wasn't painful, just a gentle pulse, as if something was softly knocking, asking to be noticed. She thought back to her younger years, to when she first started reading about spirituality. She had always believed in energy, in the unseen forces that moved through the universe, but she had never experienced anything like this before. Was it possible that her body was adjusting to something greater, or was she simply imagining it all? Eleanor wasn't sure, but deep inside a quiet voice whispered, "Pay attention." And so she did. Eleanor had always loved the quiet. She enjoyed the soft rustle of leaves in the wind, the distant hum of the city, and the gentle ticking of the clock in her living room. But lately, the world around her didn't feel quiet at all. It started with the sounds. One afternoon, she was sitting at her kitchen table, sipping her usual chamomile tea, when she suddenly became aware of the subtle hum of the refrigerator. It wasn't that the sound was new. Her refrigerator had always made that faint noise, but now it was unbearably loud, like an engine roaring in the background. She rubbed her temples, trying to shake the irritation, but it was impossible to ignore. Then came the ticking of the clock. For years, that old clock had been a comforting presence in her home, a steady rhythm that blended into the background. But now, each tick felt sharp and intrusive, as if someone were tapping a pen against a desk right next to her ear. She tried moving to another room, but the sound followed her, refusing to fade into the background like it once had. The world had grown too loud. Even outside, things felt different. The birds that once sang sweet melodies in the morning now seemed to chirp at a higher pitch, their calls ringing in her ears like tiny alarms. The wind, which she had always found soothing, now felt deafening as it whistled through the trees. Even the distant murmur of passing cars on the street seemed overwhelming, and it wasn't just sound. Light had changed too. One morning, she stepped outside for her usual walk, only to be met with a brilliance that felt unnatural. The sunlight seemed too bright, almost piercing, even though it was no different from any other day. She squinted, shielding her eyes with her hand, wondering if she had suddenly developed a sensitivity to light. At home, the glow of the lamp in her living room, which had always been soft and warm, now felt harsh. Even the screen on her phone seemed to strain her eyes. But the most bewildering change was her sense of smell. She had always loved the scent of fresh lavender from her garden, but now the fragrance was so strong it almost made her dizzy. A simple walk past her spice rack filled her nose with the intense aroma of cinnamon, pepper, and garlic, all at once, as if they had multiplied in potency overnight. One day, while grocery shopping, she caught the scent of someone's perfume from across the aisle, a scent so overwhelming that it made her step back in shock. It wasn't just that the smell was strong, it was as if she could sense the layers of it, the floral notes, the musk, the alcohol underneath. She had never experienced anything like it before. And then, there was the feeling of energy. It wasn't something she could see or touch, but she felt it everywhere. When she walked into a room, she could sense a shift in the atmosphere. It was subtle, like an invisible pressure, but undeniable. Some places felt heavy, as if the air itself carried tension, while others felt light and warm, like a soft embrace. It happened with people, too. When Melissa called one evening, Eleanor sensed her daughter's emotions before she even spoke. Melissa's voice was cheerful, but Eleanor felt something deeper, a subtle heaviness like an unspoken worry. "Are you all right, sweetheart?" she asked gently. There was a pause. Then, Melissa sighed. "I didn't want to worry you, but work has been really stressful." "How did you know?" Eleanor didn't know how to explain it. She just felt it. At first, these new sensitivities overwhelmed her. The world had become too loud, too bright, too intense. But as days passed, she began to see them differently. Not as burdens, but as gifts. She could hear the subtlest sounds, appreciate the delicate details of nature, sense emotions beyond words. It was as if she had been given a new way of experiencing the world, one that required patience and understanding. Perhaps this wasn't just a strange phase. Perhaps her body wasn't failing her. Perhaps she was waking up to something more.